I often talk about Imperial eras on this channel. I define them as a time where an artist has reached critical mass, eclipsing their peers artistically, critically, and commercially. Not all artists get the honor of being celebrated this way. Ariana Grande had hers 5 years ago with Thank You Next, her 5th studio record, and the culmination of her entire career at the time. In this video essay, we'll talk about the lead up to Thank You Next, how historic it had been for the streaming era, which was finally finding its groove, and how it cemented Ariana's place as an eternal A-lister in the genre. We'll also discuss each of the tracks before I give the record a retroactive rating. The lead up to Thank You Next. When I discuss Ariana's discography, I often use her album covers color motifs. Her first 3 records, Yours Truly, My Everything, and Dangerous Woman, all vary in sound and production, yet they all share a common black and white motif, something that was broken when Sweetener dropped in full color. I found this to represent Ariana's agency artistically. Yours Truly was an excellent debut record that showcased Ari's knack for R&B, My Everything felt like a blockbuster grab bag of smash hits, and Dangerous Woman was a stunning technical demonstration for both Grande and Max Martin, who had executive produced that record. Still, many critics did note that Ari was not living to her potential as an artist at that point. Sweetener, her 4th record, marked an experimental shift for Grande. Grande was a credited songwriter on every track except its opener Raindrops, a cover of The Four Seasons and Angel Cried. Much of it was actually produced by the legendary Pharrell Williams, with a few pop gems from Ilya and Martin thrown in for good measure. Fans and critics alike saw it as her most personal record at the time, one about love, lust, survival, hope, anxiety, and strength. It produced 2 top 10 singles, No Tears Left to Cry and God Is a Woman, as well as one of her signature tracks, Breathin'. It debuted at number 1 and even won Ariana her very first Grammy-winning Best Pop Vocal Album in 2019. The era, however, came to an abrupt close when Mac Miller, her ex-boyfriend, unfortunately passed due to an overdose in September, prompting Grande to take a public hiatus. Grande publicly announced her split from then-fiancé and one of Sweetener's muses, Pete Davidson. Grande would return to the studio with trusted collaborators to therapeutically create a masterwork of pop. Production was mostly handled by Martin, Ilya, and Tommy Brown. Victoria Monet, a longtime co-writer of hers, helped her form half of the record. The record came together quickly, being done in weeks versus the usual years that it takes to hone a piece. As many as 9 songs were written in 1 week. Thank You Next felt like a real-time era. I will never forget when Pete Davidson had made some remarks about his relationship with Grande, even bringing it up on SNL.
Hey, I'm Pete.
Hey, Pete.
You want to get married?
No.
0 for 3.
Ariana dropped the title track randomly on a Saturday, breaking the conventional Friday release as an almost real-time response that broke the internet. Thank You Next was an undeniable smash hit that debuted at number 1, Ari's first ever, with only 5 tracking days. The confessional track was catchy, poignant, and pointed. Everyone was talking about it. It became a catchphrase. I'm shocked it was never nominated for a Grammy. Thank You Next topped the charts for 7 weeks, breaking the record for most streams for a female artist in a single day. The music video itself was a brilliant homage to classic 2000s rom-coms, arguably helping kickstart Gen Z's obsession with that era. In December, Grande released Imagine, an R&B ballad and promo single that she performed on Jimmy Fallon to tease the record. The album's 2nd single, 7 Rings, dropped in the following January. The Rodgers and Hammerstein sampling trap smash pop hit debuted at number 1, spending 8 weeks there. In the UK, this song and her follow-up single, Break Up With Your Girlfriend, traded places twice, making her the first female artist to self-replace on the official charts there. The album release and its legacy. This album dropped on February 8th along with the final single, Break Up With Your Boyfriend, which peaked at number 2. Ariana had the top 3 occupied, with all of her singles making her the first artist since the Beatles 55 years ago at that point. This was a chart feat that'd only be topped by Taylor's occupation of the whole top 10 just 2 years ago for Midnights. Though considering how competitive points and consumption was in 2019, Ariana did do some insane numbers back then. Thank You Next is critically adored, marking Ariana Grande's highest Metacritic to date. Critics praised it as a pop masterpiece, a confident piece of work that really just showcased Ari's journey to healing. Those who said that Ari had been holding herself back artistically praised this record for its honesty. It really felt like Ari was solidifying her personality and identity after the Sweetener breakthrough. Both Billboard and Rolling Stone named it their top record of 2019, with other publications ranking it pretty high. It even landed on a few Decades Ends lists. It was nominated for 4 Grammys, Album of the Year, and Best Pop Vocal, while Seven Rings was nominated for Best Pop Solo and Record of the Year. She was shut out infamously along with Lana Del Rey's Norman fucking Rockwell when Billie Eilish made history and won the Big 4 categories with her debut record. To promote Thank You Next, Ariana went on the very successful Sweetener World Tour. She also headlined Coachella, had the time to curate a Charlie's Angels soundtrack, which featured Don't Call Me Angel, a collab with Lana Del Rey and Miley Cyrus. She released a collab with Social House, co-wrote Normani's debut single Motivation with Victoria Monet, and jumped on a Lizzo Good As Hell remix. She ended 2019 the most paid musician according to Billboard. Grande concluded the era with K-Bye For Now, a live version of her Sweetener World Tour. Now it's time to discuss the record itself. I want to discuss some overall thoughts I had before a short dive into each track. Thank You Next at the time was Ariana's shortest record. It never received a deluxe version in the States. It remained a very sharp, 12-track, no-filler record. Each track feels purposeful and adds to the overarching story that Ariana forms. Compared to Sweetener, it's cohesive but remains varied. It has pop, trap, R&B, but it also dives into subgenre like dancehall and soul. Ariana's voice is what really ties this record together, and it remains the highlight despite very complex production. I really like the extremes of emotion displayed by Grande here, the tenderness of Imagine, to the bounciness of NASA, to the devastation of Ghostin'. This is a record that's about the emotional spectrums that grief takes us to, and I think that's why it's so powerful. The decision to not have features feels deliberate considering how generous Grande has been with them. Here we have a focused, didactic statement record that forces her to stand on her own feet. For the first time in her career, Grande has credits on every track. There's still many collaborators, but she curated her soul into each record. There's a diaristic energy to Thank You Next. We can sort of glean who these tracks are about, but it's irrelevant in the sense that we rewrite these songs to our own struggles. Thank You Next is somehow both Ariana's most personal, yet most relatable record to date. I hate to play comparison games, but the parallels between this album and 1989, another Imperial era partly formed by Max Martin, it was something that I noticed in 2019 and today in retrospect. If 1989 was for the late millennial crowd, Thank You Next was Gen Z's answer to that. That's not to take away credit. Thank You Next's impact on the streaming world and even linguistically is something that makes it a unique and cultural touchpoint in its own right. Thank You Next for the time being remains Grande's peak era, objectively speaking. Another era may come to displace it one day, but that does not seem to be happening anytime soon. But certainly it cemented a fan base that will always be there for Ariana, which is rare in the pop world. The record opens with Imagine, one of her career best ballads. This track is a perfect example of Grande's genre infusion, a trap beat, R&B melodies, the vocals of a pop diva, they all come together to memorialize a love that cannot be. The verses describe a modest love while the pre-chorus and chorus build to a dreamy crescendo. It's tragic that she asked for so little in the track, but the whistle tones, they're just devastating. Needy's a confessional track, it's very well constructed. The simple production lets Ari vocally flourish and express this need to be seen that really drives her. It feels like a direct response to how dark her life has gotten. She admits that she's messed up and that she loves too hard. It can read as romantic or towards a loved one or even her fan base. I really adore the strings at the end. A friend of mine pointed out the parallel that it shares with I Don't Care from Dangerous Woman, likely to represent her inner feelings that she does care and that she is vulnerable. Also, quick mention, I crashed my car to this song. Well, I got crashed into while listening to this song, so it matters a lot to me. It's ironic NASA's next because it's about needing space from a man. Opening with a Shangela quote, this bouncy R&B cut starts with a clever verse setting the stage, emphasis on tonight punctuating each line. There's a lot of callbacks to Better Off from Sweetener. The pre-chorus has her admit that she can't miss someone who's never really gone. She's the universe and her man is NASA, trying to explore too much of her mystery. I find the chorus is effortlessly catchy. She'll give her man the world, but she needs her space. The cheeky "you know I'm a star" speaks to her building confidence throughout the record and her own worth. Verse 2's line, "usually I would orbit around you, but gravity seems to be the only thing that's pulling me," it hints that the relationship is starting to become routine. The bridge is as hooky as the hook itself. In it, she points out that she's trying to self-discover, but if he keeps dragging her under, she's gonna lose her shine. I always found that the outro, reiterating the opening line, implies that she's gonna choose to heal over this lover. Bloodline continues this idea of building distance, this time emotional distance from a situationship. This song is steeped in reggae. It's a banger where she says she can't really want this guy in her bloodline. It's just fun that he has to let go. The second verse is heartbreaking because she implies the idea of true love has sailed away from her, and the bridge does speak to her feeling complete enough that she no longer needs someone. Fake Smile is a soulful track about the pressures that she's faced from the media and her journey trying to cope with so much tragedy in her life. In the song, she pivots to talk about what she reads about herself, how grateful she is for her life, but how she's been through way too much. The bridge feels like a mantra to herself to not hide her pain, to stop lying because it's starting to destroy her. Bad Idea is one of my highlights. It's part trap, part rock, pure pop. It's a track about calling someone up that she shouldn't because she needs relief. Lyrically, it's straightforward, but vocally, she's belting and on point with the technique. The melody work is immaculate. I often see Makeup be clowned for its nonchalant lyric work, especially on the bridge, but the breezy production and the witty double entendres make the song work. The song captures the push and pull of a toxic on and off, the metaphor of makeup itself being a temporary cover-up for the wounds and imperfections. The relationship she sings about serves the same purpose. Ghosting is the emotional climax of the record. It is the longest track, but not a second is wasted. It's a profoundly personal track about the pain of grief, considering the context behind it. It's such a personal track I don't really want to dive into the implications of it beyond praising its structure. The pre-chorus exonerates her lover who's also going through it. The chorus is her empathy, and the post-chorus is assurance and admission that she's got baggage. The honesty on this track is unreal. I totally get why Grande pushed to leave the track off the track listing, but Scooter had convinced her to keep it on, and I'm glad we have it, but it's a very tough listen. In My Head opens with a quote from her good friend Doug Middlebrook. Many debate who this track is about, but that's irrelevant. I think the ambiguity of the lyrics and the general idea of falling in love with someone who isn't who you thought they were is a universal idea. It's actually one of the most moody and sassy underrated cuts. The production is complex, which made the Vogue video for it really fascinating because its visual simplicity keeps the focus on her and the music. The final 3 songs are the singles, which are better contextualized as part of the record itself. Seven Rings was overplayed to death for me at the time, but I've come to like it. Ariana actually raps on the track and manages to sell the homage to The Sound of Music. Her bridge tribute to Biggie's flow on Gimme the Loot is just also plain fun. It may be the weakest song on the record, but I understand why it was a smash hit. It's a welcome break from the darker emotions. The title track remains one of my favorites. The song's remarkably well written. Each verse really progresses the story, being thankful for her exes, learning to love herself, and hoping for the best when she eventually does find the one. The line in the bridge, "God forbid something happens," leads the song as a smash is my favorite. It's humorous, but it's also confirmation that Ari's starting to truly love herself and own her individual power. Her happiness is not contingent on relationships, which in retrospect, considering the modern context of the time, makes the song truly ironic, but that's something else. I still consider this one of her best songs to date, and likely the song that I think she'll be most remembered for. The record ends on "Break Up With Your Girlfriend, I'm Bored," which I wasn't sold on as a closer. I think of it as an epilogue in some way. I think that it's more of a jest than a serious track. It's a confident, flirty, straightforward Ari track, the production paying homage to NSYNC's "It Makes Me Ill" in the bridge. I found that the music video recontextualizes this to self-love, but I'm not sold on that. I always felt that Thank You Next would have been a much stronger conclusion statement, but then again, ending with this track feels like a cynical ending where she starts to fall back into old habits, which does speak to the toughness of growing. Sometimes you regress, and healing is not a journey that ends when you want it to. Something that's genius, but really bittersweet. Overall, I've come to really recognize Thank You Next as one of those 10 out of 10 records that I talk about frequently. I had not listened to it in so long, but it felt both familiar and fresh. I might not be in love with it all the time, but I can't help but think of it as an essential pop record that everyone who loves the genre needs to spin at least once. I'm not sure Eternal Sunshine will even come close to this record, not that it has to, but if it's even 80% of how good this record is, we're in for a treat. And that's a wrap. Thank you so much for tuning in to my Thank You Next video. I had intended to cover this record 5 years ago, but life got in the way, and now it's kind of funny to circle back to it from a retrospective lens and see the era for what it was in whole. I feel like Thank You Next is one of those eras that we will be talking about for a long time. I really want to give a quick shout out to my members, to my subscribers. Thank you so much for your patience. February is a crazy month. There is another 2019 album that you guys all love that I'm covering very soon. And I can't wait to see you next video.